Raising the Stakes, where we turn the interview around on Kara to answer questions that we get from the community. I'm your guest interviewer, Jay Knight, and today we're on episode 2, and that is going to be getting back to nature. Kara, how you doing today?
Doing good. How about you, Jay?
I am great. I have been getting out into nature myself, having nothing to do with the cattle. I'm in my backyard, much smaller than the backyard at the ranch. But I know we are getting ready for a very important season going into next week. So why don't you just go right into it? What's on the agenda for the next couple weeks?
Yeah, you mentioned getting back into nature. Man, this is one of my favorite times of year when the grass starts greening up again, starts actively growing. The sun is shining. I mean, even in the mornings when it's not that warm, it feels so much nicer in the springtime. Like, you know how chilly it is in the winter when you're outside, even in the wee hours of the morning. It turns around when days start getting longer. It's crazy. Now you think about that within the ranching community is we talk about the weather so much. That is like the topic of the conversation. I literally was just on the phone with my dad talking about the weather this week because we're planning on turning cattle out and we have to have enough heat units to be able to start growing grass. So the grass is greening up now. We're coming on to spring turnout, but you have to have enough heat to where the grass really starts to grow. So you have enough growth out there before you turn cattle out on this new growth. And that way it can continue to regrow. So there's some of those nuances of, it's springtime. We're getting all the fences ready, all the pastures, they're starting to green up. They're starting to grow green grass and turning wells on. A lot of the things that have been dormant over the winter, we're now kind of reviving that, bringing all of, nature's bringing everything back to life and getting ready to be able to turn cattle out on green grass here in next week.
And what does turning cattle out fully encompass? I mean, I've been out there for a few times, but kind of walk me through how you're preparing.
The big thing is making sure that more or less your facilities are ready. So fences are a big piece of that because when we take cattle off in the fall, the fences are where they are, which sometimes they're not, they've had wear and tear because you've had cattle out on them. So especially with yearlings, they like to rub on your fences and break your wires or break posts or even just wood posts start to rot off over the years because of the sand and, the moisture, etc. So you got to make sure that all of your fences are still in good shape to make sure cattle stay in the pastures where you put them when you turn them out. But also it's just the reliance on Mother Nature. So we need enough moisture to be able to grow grass and enough heat to be able to get enough grass to where we know that cattle have plenty to eat when we turn them out. And nature tells us when it's ready for that. This year, it's a little bit earlier than it normally is. We target about the middle of April, but we started getting green grass here the end of March, which we do on occasion. But now the next week or so, we're going to get enough heat that I think we'll be ready to go.
So is there anything that could happen, if you saw a storm coming or something in the forecast, is there anything that would say actually, no, we need to wait?
Yes. If we're forecasting a spring blizzard, we're going to wait. Because not only, from a cattle perspective, but also from a grass perspective. Because when, you start your growing season, you want to make sure that grass can continue its growing season. So instead of it starting to grow and then it gets cold, it stops that grass from continuing to grow. It's not that it's not going to pick back up, but you really want that trajectory to be on the upward plane. So when that grass starts to grow, you want it to have enough good weather to where it can continue on. Typically, our spring storms, they're relatively short-lived. So from, a cattle perspective, typically it's not that big of an issue unless it's a major blizzard. But we can see snow in the forecast. And when it's really cold, it puts our grass further behind. When we get enough heat, then we know that, our trajectory of the grass, so our cattle have green growing grass to graze for the entire season, is on a good plane.
And with our area where our cattle are grazing, we have a really unique landscape of grasses and water access and different forages. But like, walk me through kind of what makes our process and land special, and why it's so great for the cattle and then high quality beef.
Sure. So we, just like a lot of places in the US, we're tailor made to be able to graze cattle during this season where we live. We call this the Sandhills of Colorado, which typically in the Sandhills, whether it's Colorado or more notably Nebraska, typically you think of the Sandhill area. We have the ability to be able to grow grass during our summer growing season. So typically that April till September timeframe of grass that really packs a big punch. So our cattle can gain over 2 pounds a day just on native range, which there's other places in the US that can happen and does happen. But as far as the cyclical nature of beef cattle production, it makes a ton of sense for these cattle, which they're yearlings at this stage, which basically they're about a year old. That's why we call them a yearling, to come out here for, at least this 5 months so they can naturally grow with Mother Nature, more or less, with what Mother Nature provides. And frankly, if you just talk from an economic perspective in beef cattle production, your cost of gains, so how much it takes to be able to put a pound on that animal, goes down by over half when you take them out to grass, comparatively as if you were feeding them stockpiled forage. So when you think about like the economics, of course, there's definitely a piece of that. But more importantly, it's the nature working with nature. So these animals are geared, they're ruminants, they're geared to consume grass. And frankly, our native range is suitable to be able to graze cattle. We're not in a high development area. We're not in an area that there's a ton of row crop farming. It's not really suited for that. I mean, it can be done from a dry land perspective, but when you have dry land, you're relying on Mother Nature to give you the moisture you need to grow. And if you don't, then you need irrigation. And that's something that we do not have here. So we rely on Mother Nature to make sure that what resources we have are being utilized instead of, going to irrigation to where we can pull water from somewhere else to be able to grow crops versus be able to grow this grassland that these animals, which I always say, hey, this is a cow's superpower, is they can take this grass, this native rangeland that wasn't made for really a whole lot else, and convert that to a high quality protein in a really efficient manner.
And the other thing is, if you were going to farm out near us, you're making a huge bet. And the other thing is you're tilling up soil that has basically been, I don't want to say unchanged, but has sustained the same ecosystem for centuries. And the sustainability comes from having those animals on that grass year over year, and not so much anything that humans are doing. It's putting the cattle out there and keeping the land as it is without kind of, would it be not necessarily, I mean, you just destroy the soil and the grass to try and farm. I don't think you can ever really get that soil back, right?
There is a lot of conversation around that. So the topic of carbon sequestering, that is one of those. And that's part of that piece of the puzzle that we talk about with grazing, typically ruminants, because they're the ones suited to do that, with grazing ruminants on native rangeland, especially places like where we live that's pretty arid. We just do not get a ton of moisture. It's different when you get into, where you are from, Jay, in the Midwest, and they're trying to get rid of water. We do not have that problem here. We're trying to keep the water we have in the ground to be able to, grow the grasses, be able to rejuvenate our aquifer, which, we're on the Ogallala Aquifer here. So that's where all of our, our livestock water, really our water in general is coming from. It's coming from the ground out of the Ogallala Aquifer. So we're relying on, Mother Nature to kind of help replenish these things. So it makes sense to be able to work with nature in that process versus trying to, till and farm. And, there's a lot of places that it makes sense. For us, it frankly just doesn't make sense when we have a ruminant of a cow to be able to use this grass for other purposes, and keep that carbon in the ground, not tilling it up, keeping these native ecosystems where, the wildlife be able to have their habitats, and, a lot of the things that sometimes we don't think about with nature is it's not even just about how we're utilizing it, but it's the other pieces that are functioning in nature as well. So there is a lot of topic of conversation around whether you till ground or you don't. And there's some places that are no-till, which there's a reason that this part of the U.S. is gone to primarily, no-till type of farming, is some of that and some of the environmental concerns. And, when you till ground, it's easier for it to blow away than if you keep it intact. So,
and it's not just kind of opening up a fence, putting the cattle in, and then say, "Hey, I'll see you in a few months." Like a lot goes into the herd management and making sure that you're moving the cattle. What kind of schedule are you keeping throughout the spring and summer? Because I know you're up and at it real early in the morning, and those cattle don't wait for anyone to make sure that they're getting what they need. They will move the fence for you if you don't.
In a lot of cases, that can be true. Most of turnout, really the planning and the prep is done prior to us turning cattle out, making sure that, cattle are ready. They're in the right place. They're going to the right location. Fencing, of course, as you mentioned, is a big piece of that. Fencing and water, particularly where we live. Because if you look at any rotational grazing situation, it's typically around water, because that's, cattle are going to commingle at water. That is, especially out here, because we don't have running water. We have tanks. We have holding tanks of the water that's coming out of the ground for the animals to be able to drink from. And typically, depending on the pasture, a lot of times you only have one water source, possibly two, depending on how big the pasture is. So everything really is going to revolve around water, and then the fencing side of that to be able to move cattle accordingly. We do have some different pastures that we know have different types of grasses. So starting cattle earlier in some of these where we have some of these, cooler season grasses that have already started versus some of the warm seasons that are going to come later. So we've got some pastures over west of here that they have more grama grass. They have like harder ground than these, in these hills and these sand hills. So you do manage those differently because they're a different type of ground that grows different type of grasses to where the cattle can use those in a different manner. And then you have to factor in Mother Nature on how much rain you're actually going to get throughout the season. Depending on that is what types of grasses really are going to grow, and then how long cattle can be grazed. Because we don't want to do anything that would be detrimental to our ground. So we're not going to overgraze the ground, which overgrazing can come from when you don't have enough moisture, of course, and you have the same number of animals out there continuing to eat off that forage. So there's a lot of more foresight that goes into that. And the daily management is making sure all those things stay in place, as far as cattle staying in place where they need to be, fences staying in good shape. So once again, cattle stay where they need to be, and water continues to be another big piece of that. We've got to make sure cattle have access to fresh, clean water.
I think another interesting thing I learned just from listening to you all, because I don't get to come out and just quiz you to learn everything. It's kind of been through osmosis, but it's not just one type of grass either that grows at the same time, or several grasses that grow at the same time. Don't we? Or I believe I've heard people talk about like the three different grasses, or at least like the three different times that grasses are growing. So you get your early grass, and then you get your grass that's going into the summer, and then there's some like late grass that's moving into the fall. Am I off base?
To a certain degree, most of it's typically two. So it'd be
Two?
warmer,
Okay.
cool season. Yeah.
Okay.
Some of them you'll get some regrowth in the fall of some of your cool seasons because of the seasonality of where you're at, as far as time frame. But you only get so much growth on this grass depending on daylight too. So this is, maybe I wouldn't even say this is scientific. This is kind of something that I've learned throughout the years of listening to my dad and understanding how we manage this grass. Is you only have a certain amount of time for this grass to continue to put gain on cattle. Mm-hmm. And then it starts to level off and go down. And typically protein content is where it ends up. And most of that is related to sunlight. So your grass is only going to go so far. And then it's, cattle are going to stop gaining on it. And that's, we talk a lot about the different type of production scenarios of grass fed, grass finished, however, you want to think about those types of things. But there is only so much that you can do on native range here where we live because of that, because we have a very short growing season compared to, Georgia or Florida or places like that. But if you put the kind of grasses that we have here in our peak growing season against grass in Florida, it'll outperform 10-1. I mean, they may have green growing grass in Florida year round, but that doesn't mean that those cattle are gaining on that grass year round. They call it, that grass can get washy, and it just doesn't pack the punch, the protein content, etc., for those cattle to continue to grow and gain.
I've heard one person say that a grass can be too sweet, too sugary, maybe.
Yeah, the washy is the term that old ranchers use around here for what that's worth. So whether
I'll get there someday.
That's not a technical term, Jay. That's more of a But so whether it's just the difference in the water content and the protein content and where that levels off, I'll have to ask a plant scientist. That's out of my wheelhouse. I focus on the cow side.
And that's another thing too, with how many different places you can have grass and therefore have cattle, and then the different ecosystems that those cattle are in, and the different cultures and towns and cities, and just a completely different environment. And so when we look at these kind of how people want to label things, so they when we get questions from our customers where they're talking about regenerative and they're talking about organic and grass fed, there's really, like, if everyone were to have all those labels that people want to see or are hoping to see, that would mean that we'd almost be a mono. People get upset about like monocrop stuff on the agriculture side, but there's really no way to kind of do that and respond to the market in that way on the cattle side. You're putting the animals where they've essentially been growing up for the last few centuries, and the environment is what it is, and we're keeping things as natural as possible. But as far as like being able to have our label mean the same thing as this label over here, I think there's a lot of confusion in the label space. And how do you respond to like this idea that like some like the cattle that we raise or the beef that we provide has to be X, Y, or Z?
So the label conversation is a nuanced one that when we started CCB, it was a different label at a different time, right? I've seen the natural label or the organic label. It's kind of like those labels now are the regenerative label within production ag and how we do things. Typically, what I would say is most of the time those labels came about from a marketing perspective, not necessarily from the perspective maybe that a consumer thinks about that. And that's what we wanted to make sure that we met head on, was talking through the process, and having the mindset that, I mean, it's high quality beef and you know the people and you know the hands that raised it and where it came from. Not necessarily buy ours because it's X, Y, and Z, which makes it that much better than, a commercial or conventionally raised or supermarket beef, however somebody wants to say that. Because cattle they have a wonderful superpower of being able to take this grass and convert it into a high quality protein. But at the end of the day, we want to fuel people's lives, and beef is an exceptional way to do that. However that came about, whatever label somebody would like to put on it. But typically, the further away you get from the production practices, the more need for a label. So that's why we have conversations like these of, let's talk about what we do, let's talk about how we do it and why we do it this way, and talk about why it matters to our consumer. What difference does that make to you? Because a lot of times I've realized over the years that when I get questions from one of our beef consumers, so for example, like, is your beef organic, or whatever buzzword. Typically, it's not necessarily about it being organic. It's more they want to know that we care, and they want to know that we took those extra steps to make sure that animal had a high quality life. It was helping to be able to mimic nature in the way that it was designed, and a lot of like the emotional pieces of it, from animal care, animal welfare, not necessarily about what that label means or doesn't mean.
Yeah, the thing from the marketing side, I know we marketers sometimes get a bad rap, but what we don't see as consumers, people making buying decisions, is that, when I'd say 5 years ago, it was a bigger deal where people were really seeking out something that was grass-fed, grass-finished, without really caring about the taste of the beef that they were getting or where the beef came from. They were just so hyper-focused on the label. And so being so focused on the label and not the beef itself, we don't see what goes into actually being able to achieve that label. So when someone is selling 100% grass-fed, grass-finished, you and I know that beef could be coming from Australia and on container ships, like making its way, or from Brazil, where they continue to cut down rainforests for grazelands and agriculture. So, like, there's got to be a lot more nuance, which again, this is why we're doing this episode, right? Or the show. It is kind of, I don't know the good way to say it, but like you're so happy with this label that you really don't care what it took to get it. Instead of watching our Instagram or coming to our website and actually seeing the actual care and expertise that goes into high quality beef raised right here in the United States.
Yeah. Sometimes we lose the forest through the trees.
There we go.
That can happen, especially when we become hyper focused on one thing in general. But yeah, the label conversation is definitely one to highlight from that. I'm all about choice. People can choose however they would, whatever type of food they would like to consume. it's just a difference in, kind of the understanding and the why and a lot of the things that are behind the labels, not necessarily just the labels. So, I would encourage our listeners not to lose sight of the forest through the trees.
Mm-hmm. So, what at the end of the day do you think is what really matters for having high quality beef and a great eating experience?
I think that depends.
Kind of a loaded question. It was on this list we went over earlier.
I would say, especially phrased like that, it depends on the person. What matters to them? I could go deep into the science of what makes great steak. There's plenty of a list. If we want to do that, we can go into all of the details of what makes, basically a steakhouse experience at home. And that's what we're recreating with the quality of beef that comes from CCB. Is basically you can have that exceptional steak in the comfort of your own home. As Jeff said, you don't even have to put pants on. It's fine. You can just have your steak at home with your family and the people you love. For other people, it may be, as you mentioned, that label. So maybe it's in their mind of, hey, if it's grass-fed, grass-finished, that means that animal had a higher quality of life. Maybe that's a thought that they have of why that makes that beef better. Or maybe it was something in the science that says, this is healthier for me. I would say, though, one of the big things, and this is something that I put a lot of thought into, because Jay, I'm like one of the biggest animal lovers known to man. And I take it very personally to make sure that these animals have a high quality of life. And in that, we are very intentional about what we do and how we do it. And even more intentional about honoring that life by making sure that end of life, because these animals are created for us to be able to nourish our bodies as well. Like that's the intent when we're raising beef cattle, is that they're eventually going to be able to be food to nourish our bodies. So keeping in mind that we do everything to make sure that they have the highest quality of life possible, and that end of life is exactly the same thing. It's I've had a lot of veterinarian mentors and customers throughout my years of working in animal health. And one of the quotes that still sticks with me from one of my vet customers and mentor was, these animals have one bad day. That's it. And I'm like, yep, that's fair. I'm going to take that to heart, is we make sure that they only have one bad day. And frankly, you could argue that they're not going to remember that one bad day. So we make sure that we do everything right because they're in our care. And it's our job to make sure that happens. Mm-hmm. So those are all kind of some different thoughts on that. If you want to get into the science or you want to get into the actual emotion of what makes beef great.
Well, you did say we could go into it. So here's what I'm thinking. Maybe for the next episode, we will talk about what goes into that amazing steak experience, because next month we are very deep into grilling season by that point. And I think a lot of people are going to be getting the grill going, being outside, cooking up a lot of steak for their friends and family, a lot of burger. So maybe let's think about that for episode 3 of Raising the Steaks.
Yeah, I can go into the science, and then I got to rope Jeff in on how to actually cook something. So
right. And then I'll just maybe we'll do it live, and then all I have to do is eat and ask questions.
There you go. That's solid thought, Jay.
Yeah. So let's go ahead. Let's call it there. Great episode, Kara. Thank you so much for answering these questions and kind of bringing us into the world of ranching. Everyone, take a look at our Instagram. Over the next few months, you're going to be seeing a lot of great video of the work that goes into turning cattle out, getting the fences taken care of, getting the water turned back on. There's so much that goes into every single day, and we try our best to capture it to bring that reality to you. So if you have any questions, please send them to us at info@coloradocraftbeef.com, and we would love to answer those. But yeah, I think we've got some decisions to make for episode 3 of Raising the Stakes, and I'll call it there. Kara, do you have anything else that you'd like to say before we sign off?
No, that's great. Thanks, Jay.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day, everybody.